Hello there, I'm Thundaga, and this is my How to Make a Pokemon Game tutorial series. This series will cover all of the essential info that you need to make a Pokemon game in RPG Maker and Pokemon Essentials. In this episode, we'll be covering Pokemon forms. First, we'll review how and where all Pokemon forms are defined. Then we'll look into the various ways that Pokemon forms can be set or changed. We'll cover form-changing events, as well as items, abilities, moves, and even regional forms. And then we'll make our own new Pokemon form and test it out in-game. With all that said, let's get into it. The forms are defined in our PBS folder in a file called Pokemon_forms. In here, we can see the data for all the different types of Pokemon forms, from Mega Evolutions to regional forms and everything else. We'll cover Mega Evolutions in their own tutorial later, so for now, let's just scroll down a bit to find another Pokemon form and take a look at how that's defined. A good example would be the Alolan forms of Vulpix and Ninetales. These are regional forms with many differences from their base forms. Form 0, or base form, are fire types, but here we can see that Form 1 are defined as ice, and then ice fairy type. We can also see that the form name is Alolan, so when we view this Pokemon form in the Pokédex, it will be labeled as such. Here in this PBS are where all the differences are defined. When setting up a form, if something is not defined as a difference, then it will instead just draw those values from the base form. So for example, Alolan Vulpix, Form 1 here, has a lot of differences defined, from the type to the abilities and the moves, etc. It does not have any new base stats defined though, so it will use the same stat values as base Vulpix. Scrolling down though here, we can see that Alolan Ninetales does have different base stats defined. This means that Alolan Ninetales will have different stats than base Ninetales. Sometimes when making a new form though, we only care about changing a couple of things. For example, Castform has 4 forms, the base form, and then Sunny, Rainy, and Snowy. These forms don't change a whole lot for the Pokemon except for the typing, the Pokédex color, and the Pokédex description. Another Pokemon that changes even less for each form is Arceus, which only changes the typing. Later, when we make our own new form for a Pokemon, we'll do something probably similar to this, where we only change a few things, such as the typing. And that's the basics for how a Pokemon form is defined. The next thing we'll need is form sprites and audio if we want. Inside of our Audio SE Cries folder, different Cry audio files exist for some Pokemon forms. For example, Oricorio here has 4 different cries for each of its forms. _1 will be for Form 1, and so on. If an alternate cry does not exist in this folder, then the base cry will just be used instead. The same is true for all Pokemon sprites. That same naming convention applies, so Ninetales _1 will be for Form 1. This applies to the front and back sprites, as well as the icons and even the overworld sprites if you're using following Pokemon. When we make a new form later, we're going to need to make a lot of new sprites and ensure that they're all named with the proper form number at the end. Now, let's look into the various ways that Pokemon can change their form. First off, for testing, we could always change a Pokemon's form through debug. In the party screen, if we select our Pokemon and then we select debug, then we can scroll down to species and form, and finally we can set that Pokemon's form. This allows us to choose from the defined forms and is very helpful for testing. Now let's try making an event that changes our Pokemon forms. How about we make in our event a guy that when we talk to them, they'll change the form of the first Pokemon in our party if we say yes. I've gone ahead and just made this event now. The way that this event works is they'll talk to us and say, hey, would you like to change your Pokemon's form? Then a show choices, yes or no. If we say no, then they'll say, okay, just come back. And if we say yes, then what will happen is we'll run some script commands here. Let's go in and take a look at what I've done. The way this script command works is it sets PKMN, or Pokemon here, to the very first Pokemon in our party. We can get this by doing $player.first_party. For reference, first party is defined in the trainer script, and there's other things we can do in here, such as last party, or the first able Pokemon, or the last able Pokemon. There's some pretty cool functions in here, so if you want to do a little testing or homework on your own, I would recommend checking some of this out. You could even remove a Pokemon at index if you want to delete a Pokemon from the party. Going back to my script here though, what this does is it gets the first Pokemon in our party, and then checks to see if that Pokemon's form is equal to 0. If it is, then set Pokemon.form equal to 1. Otherwise, set Pokemon form equal to 0, and then end at the end. I set it up in this way so that the Pokemon will flip-flop between Form 1 and Form 0. If we keep talking to this guy, we can change our Pokemon from Form 0 to Form 1, then back to 0, then back to 1, so on and so forth. Then at the very end, I'm calling following Pokemon.refresh. This will refresh our following Pokemon sprite to match the new form. You only need to do this though if you're using following Pokemon. And that's basically it for this event. Let's show it off in-game now. Here I am in Helio Town, chilling with my base form Ninetales, but let's talk to the event. Would you like me to change your first Pokemon's form? Yes! There we go, the first Pokemon in your party has now changed form. We can see that the following Pokemon sprite has been updated. Then if we go and look back at our team, we can see that the first party slot there, that Ninetales has been changed to Form 1. It's now an Ice Fairy type. Another example of a form-changing event already exists in the base maps in the Larusian Town Pokemon Fan Club. This Pokeball in the middle of the room here gives us a Pichu with a different form. The way that this works is it's going to modify a Pokemon and then give it to us through PB Add Pokemon. The first chunk of script here is setting Pokemon equal to a new Pichu at level 30, then it's giving it the item Zap Plate and it's changing its form equal to 2. It does all these other changes as well, and then finally at the end calculates the stats. Then it calls PB Add Pokemon on that Pokemon to give us the Pokemon. In this way, we can alter a Pokemon's form before we've even received it. Another great example is this gift Pokemon event here, the rightmost event in the fan club. What they do is they give us a Bulbasaur. PB Add Foreign Pokemon Bulbasaur here will give us a Bulbasaur with a nickname and a different owner, so it's considered a foreign Pokemon here. We didn't catch it, somebody else caught it and then gave it to us. When we receive this foreign Pokemon, it goes into the last slot in our party, which then makes it very easy to modify after it's been received. There's a script command here shortly afterwards where we do Pokemon equals player.lastparty, and then we start modifying it. There's plenty of modifications you can make here. You can change the ability index, nature, Pokeball, we can make it shiny, and additionally we could modify Pokemon.form here if we wanted to. In this way, you could have an event give a player a Vulpix, but specifically set its form to 1. That's basically it for form modifications in events. However, there's plenty of other ways that we can modify forms via scripts. There's a script called FormHandlers, and inside of here, we can see a lot of the different ways that forms are managed. Starting around line 146 here, we can see where a lot of multiple forms are registered, starting with Unknown. In this example, Unknown is using a random form when it's created. This is because it's calling getFormOnCreation as the proc, and then it's returning a number that's rand28. What this does is it chooses a random value in a range from 0 to 27. Looking through this list, we can see there are a bunch of different Pokemon forms registered in here, and each of them has their own special definitions for how the forms are set or are reset. Scrolling down, we can see another example here for Castform. The proc for Castform here is get form on leaving battle, and it returns 0. So what this does is it resets Castform to its base form when leaving battle. If we scroll down more, we can see even more complicated examples. For example, Burmy here. Burmy has 2 procs in its multiple forms register. There's get form on creation and get form on leaving battle. In both of these cases, it changes form based on the battle's environment. Another good example is Giratina, which will change form to 1 if it's holding the Gricious Orb, or if the map that we're on has the flag Distortion World. And this isn't using get form on creation, this is just using get form, so it will always run this check. If we have a Giratina holding the item and then we remove it, it will revert back to form 0. I said it before, but there are so many different forms registered in here, and if you want to make a new Pokemon form, then definitely look into the existing forms here for reference. Like if you wanted to make a Pokemon change form based on their held item, definitely look to Giratina or Arceus here for reference. One important note though, some items are meant to be unlosable if a specific Pokemon is holding them. For example, if we Control-Shift-F and we type in Giratina, we can see here in the item script that the Gricious Orb, looking up here, is set to be an unlosable item for this particular Pokemon. Looking through this list, we can see other Pokemon here, like Arceus is made to not lose the Fist Plate or the Phytinium Z, basically a long list of items for Arceus here. Genesect here as well, and Kyogre and Groudon, so on and so forth. If an item is unlosable, that just means moves like Trick or Fling cannot remove the item from this Pokemon. Going back to the FormHandler script, if we just scroll down all the way to the bottom, then we can see some interesting stuff related to regional forms. Firstly, around line 750 here, we have a form registry for some regional form eggs. We can see this because the proc is get form on egg creation. The way this works is that the egg form is determined by the region where the egg was produced instead of where the egg is hatched. This chunk of code here is assuming that the form number matches the region number, but that may not be the case for your game, and you may require some modifications here. For Rattata here, as the multiple forms register, as well as all of the Pokemon underneath inside the multiple forms.copy, if an egg is created, it will check the region number, and then set the form of the egg to that number if a form for that number has been defined. This way, a Meowth egg from region 1 will produce an Alolan Meowth, and a Meowth egg from region 2 will produce a Galarian Meowth. Beneath this, around line 773, we have regional forms set up for Alolan and Galarian Pokemon pre-evolutions. The way this works is it will use getForm to set our Pokemon's form to 1 if the map region that we're currently standing in is equal to a number. In the case of the Alolan region, that number is right here, and that's if the region is 1. This way, for example, if we have a Cubone and are standing in region 1, the Cubone will be set to form 1. This won't change anything on the Cubone itself because we don't have anything defined for that form, and it won't change its sprite or its stats or anything, but it will guarantee that when the Cubone evolves, it will become an Alolan Marowak instead of a base Marowak. We can see here that the multipleforms.copy is copying from Pikachu to Execute and Cubone as well here. Multipleforms.copy is great if you want to apply one complex method to a bunch of different Pokemon. This way you don't have to copy and paste the same chunk of code for every time you want it to apply to a new Pokemon. What this does is it applies the logic from Pikachu to all the other Pokemon in the list. Looking down here, we can see one is set up for Coughing as well, and it's applying from Coughing to Mime Jr. as well. Now let's say, for example, you're making a new region for your game and would like to reuse some of this existing regional form code here. Let's say for your new game, you have some new regional forms that you'd like to set up, and you are setting it up in region 3. What we could do here is go and copy all of this code and go underneath it, and let's just call this comment here, say new region. Then for example, for our Pokemon here, let's just say Snorlax. We could use the getForm proc here for our new region, but I would recommend instead using getForm on creation for this example. The reason we would do that instead of using getForm here is that if we ever take our Pokemon and then move to another region, then our new Pokemon would change form as well, and we probably don't want that. Ideally, if we make a new region and then a new form for that region, if we choose to ever leave, our Pokemon will stay in their regional form. So let's change the proc from getForm to getForm on creation. And then underneath, let's also make it so that way the region that it's checking is 3 here. And we can update this comment to just say new region. Now this means that all wild Snorlax in region 3 will be set to form 1 when they are created. And then if we wanted to have this apply to other Pokemon as well, we could go and copy this multiple forms copy, and then apply it from Snorlax to Munchlax as well. In our example game, if we ever wanted to add even more Pokemon to this regional form list, we could always just go and paste them into this multiple forms copy here. The FormHandlers script mostly covers setting Pokemon forms when they're created or post-battle, but there are a few ways that Pokemon can change form mid-battle too. The first way is with abilities, such as Castform's Forecast ability. If we Control-Shift-F and then search for Forecast here, then what we can do is look inside of Battler Change Self. Around line 191 here is where we can see the setup for this form changing ability. The way this works is that the method PBCheckForm on weather change is called anytime the weather changes, and then it changes the Pokemon's form if the conditions are true. In this case, if the Pokemon species is Castform, and if they have the active ability Forecast. From there, it then sets the form number based on the current weather type. It sets it to 1 here if it's sun or harsh sun, 2 if it's rain or heavy rain, and then 3 if it's hail. Then, if our Castform's current form isn't already set to this new number, then it plays the ability splash effect and then calls the method PBChangeForm to change Castform's form. Scrolling down, we can see even more examples of this. For example, Cherim and Flower Gift changing in the sun, or scrolling down even further, the Deoxys Sand Shift ability we made a few tutorials ago. There are so many different form-changing abilities, and if you want to try making a new one, I recommend using the existing abilities for reference and finding one close to what you're looking for. It's also possible for a Pokemon's move to change their form. A great example is with the Pokemon Aegislash. If we Control-Shift-F and search for that, then we can find in Battler Use Move where this stance change occurs. This script is responsible for when a Pokemon uses a move, and here is where the stance change occurs, if the species of the Pokemon is Aegislash, and if their ability is Stance Change. From here, it checks to see if the currently used move is a damaging move, and if it is, then change to Form 1, which is Blade Form. Otherwise, if the move's ID is King's Shield, then it'll change to Form 0, to Shield Form. I think this is really cool, because if you wanted to make a new move that changed the user's form based on the move ID, or even if it was a damaging move or not, here would be a great place to start doing that. And that's mostly it when it comes to the basics of scripting for Pokemon forms. Most of the work is done in FormHandlers, but if you want to do something a little more dynamic and specific, then you may need to look into some of the existing abilities or moves. Now let's make our own new form for a Pokemon. Since we already used it in our example, how about we make a new form for Snorlax, and we can change its type to Fairy type. After all, Snorlax is Fairy heavy. I've gone ahead and made all the Snorlax _1 sprites here for our new Fairy form. As you can see here, I made the front sprite. I've also made the back sprite, as well as the icon sprite, and even the follower sprite. I've also gone ahead and set up a shiny version for all of these, where they're a little bit more purple. Now let's also set up the PBS data for our new Snorlax. I think what I'll do now is I'll just copy one of the existing Arceus forms here, and then scroll all the way down to the bottom, paste this in, and then start setting up Snorlax Form 1 here. And the form name, we can call it Fairy type, and its types will just be Fairy. There is some more interesting things that we could do here though. We could modify the base stats, the experience it gives you, the EVs, the abilities, so on and so forth. How about we give it a new ability? How about we give it a cool ability like Pixelate, so all normal type moves will be turned into Fairy moves and get a little power boost. That's pretty good for our Fairy type Snorlax. If we wanted to, we could also go into the moves and change the entire move pool to have more Fairy type moves as well for our new Snorlax. Let's also go in and change the color as well, so that way instead of color equals black, how about color equals pink? I think that's allowed. Then we can also go in and change the Pokédex entry here. So we'll just say, it's the Fairy type Snorlax. Fairy type Snorlax. How cool. Now there's one last change I want to make before we test this out in-game. Let's go back to our scripts here for FormHandlers and update it so that way the region for Snorlax appearing in Form 1 is actually set to Region 2. This is because in a previous tutorial, we set up Region 2 to be our tutorial region for the tutorials here. So if we ever run into a wild Snorlax in Region 2, it will be Form 1. The same right now is actually also true for Munchlax because of this multiple forms.copy, but I haven't made a Fairy type Munchlax just yet. So for right now, I'll just go and delete this. Now with this setup, if a Snorlax is ever created in Region 2, it will be Form 1, which we've now defined to be Fairy type. Let's compile this and show it off in-game now. Now that we're in-game and we're in Region 2 in the tutorial region, if we open up the debug menu and go to Battle Options, Test Wild Battle, and scroll down a bit and find a Snorlax, there you are, 143. If we battle this, it should now be in Form 1. Look at that! It is a pink Snorlax with the sprites that we set up for our Form 1. I want to catch it. Alright. I'm going to hold left control, so this is a debug catch. So this will be a guaranteed 100% catch rate, because otherwise Snorlax is kind of a pain to catch. Alright, there we go. Come on, Snorlax. I want to see your stats. Look, it's the Fairy type Snorlax. How cool! Sweet. And look, it's using the weight and the footprints and everything that's the same from the base form, but we can see it is now Fairy type. It has the new Pokédex entry though. Sweet. Now, let's go and take a look at the Snorlax in our team. Look at you! Oh, and it's holding an item. Heck yeah. It's got a leftovers. Awesome. We can see here that it is Fairy type. It's using the proper icon. And now if we switch Snorlax into the front of our party, look, we can see it's using the new Fairy type follower sprite as well. Now if we interact with our NPC from earlier, we can change it back to Form 0. So now it is a base form Snorlax, which will be normal type. And let's go interact with them again so we can get our pink Snorlax back. Yes, I would like to change. Look at that. That's really neat. We've got ourselves an entirely new type of Snorlax. I mean, it's just a recolor right now, but if we wanted to, if we were a little bit better with art, we could draw entirely new Pokemon forms this way. And that does it for this tutorial on Pokemon forms. I hope you feel more comfortable editing Pokemon forms, or even making your own new forms with their own conditions. Thank you so much for watching. If you learned something from this tutorial, please remember to like and subscribe. If there's a topic you'd like to see covered next, please let me know in the comments below. To access my tutorial website, please check the link in the video description. If you wish to support me further, consider becoming a channel member, or visiting the Thundaga merch store linked in the description as well. As a reminder, this tutorial was for Pokemon Essentials version 21.1, so in the future it's possible that the layout of some things could be changed. In general though, this series should get you where you need to go when it comes to making your own Pokemon fan game. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you learned something, and I hope you have a good one. Best of luck to you in your Pokemon fan game endeavors. Bye now!